Today on TimesCast, thousands of Greeks strike in the first protest since June, but many are disillusioned with their campaign against the country's austerity measures. The Supreme Court considers whether Picasso's paintings and Alfred Hitchcock's films can be returned to the public domain. And chronic homelessness declines in New York City. Strikes are a common form of protest in Greece, but as the country continues to scramble to avoid default, its protest culture has become despondent.
This is Suzanne Daly reporting from Greece, where the first general strike since last spring took place today, and thousands of people came out in front of Greece's parliament. What was interesting about today's strike is it was not thousands of people screaming with passion. In pictures and videos, it can look like there are moments of violence. In truth, these are very short-lived little incidents. The marchers themselves seem bored, and certainly the man on the street doesn't even turn his head to look at it anymore. You can feel that there's a sense of fatigue, a weariness. It's been almost 2 years. The news has been unrelentingly bad. Greece is hoping to get its next 8 billion euro loan, part of a 110 billion euro rescue package, but even that is just a stopgap measure. And when they look down the road, all they see is more poverty, more austerity, and no good news ahead.
Lawyers for orchestra conductors and film archivists met before the Supreme Court to have a copyright law overturned.
The Supreme Court heard arguments Wednesday morning in an important copyright case that asks a very fresh question. Does Congress have the power to withdraw from the public domain more than 1 million works, including musical compositions by Stravinsky and Shostakovich, paintings by Picasso, movies by Hitchcock and Fellini, novels by Virginia Woolf and H.G. Wells? Can those works, once in the public domain, be restored to copyright protection? Small symphonies, for instance, or high school orchestras can no longer perform works that had been part of their standard repertoires because they can't afford the fees that now have become attached to these works that have been restored to copyright. There were more than the usual number of friend of the court briefs filed, and not always in an obvious way. Google, for instance, supported the orchestra conductors and others who wanted the law struck down. And Google, of course, is in the process of compiling an enormous public domain repository of books. Creators of content and owners of content, like movie studios and so on, were on the side of copyright protection. Judging from the arguments today, it seems more likely than not that the court will uphold the law and leave the high school orchestra conductors looking for other works to perform.
And New York City has seen a sharp drop in the number of chronically homeless, thanks to a new transitional housing program.
This used to be one of the major homeless encampments in the South Bronx under the Major Deacon Expressway. It's an old, abandoned train platform. And there are tunnels running under here where guys lived. About 5 years ago, we reported on a guy named Johnny 5 who lived here, and there were guys who lived up on the platform, and now it's all gated off. Tactics like this and in other places around the South Bronx is the reason that there's been an 80% drop in individual homelessness in the borough. The Department of Homeless Services has opened safe haven shelters around town. They're smaller, more private shelters with fewer restrictions where people can come and go as they please, and it's usually a temporary step toward permanent housing.
What's changed in the last couple of years is that the city and we've taken an approach that's a housing first approach, meaning that individuals don't need to be sober and clean to accept services. They don't need to be taking their medication. They don't need to be psychiatrically stable. There's an understanding that let's first address their homelessness, and then we could start addressing some of the more complicated issues in life.
The city really struggled with street homelessness for years, and this new model seems to be working. One example is Marvin Shepard, who I spent a lot of time with, who the outreach workers came back to again and again and asked him to move inside. And eventually they were successful. They moved him into a safe haven shelter, and now he's living in permanent housing, and he's been there for almost 3 years.
My name is Marvin Shepard, and this is my apartment. I actually lived on the street for 10 years, 10 hard years. They would come by on a daily basis, 2 or 3 times a day, and give me options as to what I could do to get off the streets. It didn't work right away, but they wore me down to eventually I realized that these people really can help me, and it was time for me to change my life.
He is sobered up. He had been on the streets for 10 years, abusing crack cocaine. He's re-entered his family's lives, and he seems to be doing really well.
Because I look at these pictures, and this is the last thing that I see when I walk out the door, and this is the first thing I see when I come in. And it's just a reminder to me that if I take those backward steps, I'm going to be out of her life and back on the street, and I can't allow that to happen.